All right, Coach Lee here. Let's once again talk about 2x20s. This type of workout, 2x20s, 2x23s, 2x25s, depending on the type of your client that I'm working with or the type of athlete that you are, or, eventually 3x20s, 3x25s. This is one of those workouts that's crucial towards your base period. So if you're working with me, many of my athletes are rocking out base. We went through our transition, we've done our testing, and now we're in the throes of base period, man. These next 4 to 5 months of building. And, there's actually, you hear it said all the time that, when the pros are doing workouts, that there's only, like 10 to 12 workouts that they do. Now, there can be lots of variations on those workouts, but they're really just, 10 to 12 workouts that they do. And the 2x20s, depending on my athletes, it could be 2x23, 2x24, 2x25. It's one of those staples for the workouts. And in this base period, we're really talking about 3 big concepts, okay, that we want to nail. We want to nail our consistency, plain and simple. Whatever we establish as your consistency, if it's 6 hours a week, it's 7 hours a week, 10 hours a week, 15 hours a week, we want to really make sure that we're nailing that consistency week in and week out. Another big concept is rhythm. And rhythm is just simply like, where are we going to push you? Where are we going to relax? Week in and week out. What days do we rest? What days do we go hard? What days do we go long? Right? These are all questions that we really need to answer in this base period. And then the third is that every good base plan should really have some kind of progression, right? Where you have like a 4-week progression, and this is not invented by me by any means. And you have this periodization where you have like a 4-week progression where 3 weeks you're, 1 week you're doing 6 hours, the next week you're doing 6.5 hours, the next week you're doing 7 hours, and then you rest. And then you start the next block where you start maybe at 7 hours, and then you go 7:30, and then 8, and then rest another week. And then adding TSS, making sure that you're layering up that TSS. So those 3 big concepts are at the forefront. And I had this, when it comes to progression, I listen, I train with the power meter, and I take, the idea of progression, I take it just through the roof. I nail this. It really excites me to nail progression. And so I did a 2x20. This was my second round of 2x20s in this base period. And I really wanted to, let's rock through it because it really nails a lot of different ideas in terms of progression. And so here's the workout, 2x20s. I call it rhythm and progression. And so I'm a big fan of, the platform training peaks. I use that. And so this is an example. I got my workout. This is done. One of the things I do as a coach, I go through and hide a lot of this stuff. I don't care about miles per hour or temperature. We'll hide that. I love the heart. I went up the side of a mountain. I did 2x20 up the side of a mountain. So we don't need to see that anymore. And for this, cadence was not really a part of the workout. So I really did not have any neuromuscular manipulation built into the workout. So I'll hide the cadence as well. I really use the lap button when I do my workouts. So right, I'm always using this. I do not use Garmin workouts on here, right? I have it in my head, or I'll write it down and tape it to my stem, but I use the lap button going forward just so that I can very easily pick out the intervals, in post-review analysis of the whole deal. So let's go. So my first interval, 20 minutes. All right, so I did these last week. And so the whole idea is progression. So last week I did this. I had no idea where I was at. So they were just tempo intervals. And so I started at my low, after I've tested and everything, I started at the low range of my tempo last week. So I was just like, hey, let's just get established baselines. So I did, my first one was 2x30. All right. 230 watts for the first interval. And then I like to progress my intervals. So not only do I handle progression from week to week where I'm adding volume where I'm adding intensity week from week. But within the interval, within the workout itself, I also handle progression. So last week I did my first interval at 230 average watts for that 20 minutes. And then my second interval was 240. So I always progress those two intervals just to teach my body and my mind how to work harder in time as if I was actually in a race case scenario, right? Like Andy Coggan always says, training is racing and racing is training. And so I'm always teaching my body to do these types of things in training and racing. All right, so we got back. So this week. On Monday, I went and did this again, and so I want to progress. And so last week, my first interval was 230. It was too easy, so this time I established a baseline at 244 watts. My second one was 252 watts, right? And so I'm working harder. But there's another aspect to progression for me that I try to do in these, especially these longer intervals, is the idea of negative splits, the idea of going harder and faster through time. And so for my 20-minute interval, so for this, the ultimate average watts was 244, but I would have started this at about 240. Slowly tick that up. So right here, I'm actually doing 240 watts, but when I get to here, I'm actually doing 252, 253 watts for an average of 244. And so my interval trend slope line is actually going up throughout that interval. And it's the same for this interval as well. And so basically, I nailed my intervals. I did everything just amazingly in my mind. And this is, for me, this is so psychologically satisfying, right? It's like you're climbing Teton Tenerife and you're just like fired up and excited with all the mountains that you're seeing. This is the same for me. Going up the side of the mountain where I can progress from the week before, but then also progress my intervals from my first interval to my second interval, and then within each interval, actually do negative splits, actually do a progression of going from easier to harder within the interval itself, okay? So this is, if you're coaching with me, I have some athletes that I'm doing this with, but this is definitely one methodology for, rocking out these 2x20s. All right, so if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out, Lee at pro13.com, Lee at pro13.com.